Good morning. Welcome to Alliance Defending Freedom's live stream in the Masterpiece Cake Shop v. Scardina oral argument. We're about to go into the Colorado Supreme Court here in Denver, Colorado, and we're so thankful to all of you who have joined us for the live stream this morning. I'm Kelly Fedoruk, Senior Counsel here at Alliance Defending Freedom, and I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleague Jim Campbell, who is Alliance Defending Freedom's Chief Legal Counsel. He's formerly the Solicitor General of Nebraska, has a lot of experience litigating important free speech cases. And we are especially excited this morning that we are joined by two of our clients, the man of the moment, Jack Phillips, owner of Masterpiece Cake Shop, who we're going to get to hear from today, as well as Lorie Smith, the owner of 303 Creative, who many of you also know and love. She is also joining us here to share their thoughts as we go into this important argument just here in a little bit. So, Jack, I just have to start with you. It's been such a long journey. This is your third lawsuit. How are you feeling this morning as you prepare to go into the court?
I feel really good, Kelly, because Jake Warner is the attorney who's going to be representing us, and he is the most competent attorney that I can think of. I'm just so grateful to God for him to bring Jake to represent us in this case. He's well prepared, he's articulate, he knows that this case is about free speech, and he's ready to go.
Well, that's awesome. And I want to go back. We have so many friends watching who followed your case for a while. We probably have some new friends as well, but take us back to the very beginning, long before there was ever a lawsuit against you. How did you fall in love with baking, with artistry, with cake art in the first place? Tell us how you started.
So just growing up as a kid, I was always doodling, drawing, painting, those kind of things. Just in my free time, I was always interested in art and loved to do it. When I got into high school and they offered elective classes, there was no chance that it would be anything but something in the art room. I was always down there learning pottery, learning more painting techniques, all those kind of things. Just really intrigued me. That's just something that God's given me. But then as I graduated high school and needed a job, a man who lived across the street from me owned a large wholesale bakery, factory really. And he was gracious enough to hire me, and I fell in love with baking. I thought this is something I could do for a long time. I loved the pace, I loved everything about it. And then one day, he bought out another bakery and brought in cake decorators, and I had never seen that before. And here I was looking at, what's my schedule? How can I get the most done, most efficiently? And these people were doing one cake at a time, one custom cake at a time. And I knew right then, someday I'm going to open my own cake shop or my own bakery. It's going to be a cake shop, and that's what I'm going to specialize in, where I can take all the art that I've got in my background, the baking that I love, and combine them.
Well, your dream ultimately came true. You started Masterpiece Cake Shop. Tell us the significance of the name. Why did you choose Masterpiece, and why did you choose the logo that we all love so much?
So I chose Masterpiece Cake Shop because Masterpiece says art, Cake Shop says cake, and I incorporated a painting palette with a paintbrush and a whisks to tie the art and the baking together. But also, in Masterpiece, the first part of that word is master. And Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount that no man can serve two masters. Yeah. And I knew as a follower of Christ that I had to open my bakery and run it in a way that honored him. And so every time I would write out Masterpiece, that first word stuck to me, master. Who am I going to serve today? I want to run this place in a way that honors him.
Well, that's beautiful. I love that. And I love how your faith has been such a bedrock to how you run your shop, how you treat your family. But it also really matters in terms of all of your customers that come into your shop. So share with us, how has your faith undergird your shop and how you run it?
Well, primarily I want to serve everybody who comes in and treat them the best way that I can, with the most respect that I can, treat my employees, pay my bills, do all the things that you need to do to be responsible. But I wanted to do it in ways that honored God at the same time, especially serving people, because I want them to realize that I'm a follower of Christ, that I want to serve them. But there are also cakes that they might ask for that I would not be able to create because of the message, but it would never be the person. It would just be, what are they asking me for? Are they asking me for a cake with profanity on it? I'm not going to write it. I'm not going to say it. So we have to work around some issues like that. Yeah. But I'm always glad to serve everybody.
Well, in 2012, so almost 12 years ago, unfortunately, Colorado came after you because of your beliefs. They were trying to force you to create a cake that went against your core of who you are and your beliefs about marriage. And so that case went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And 6 years ago this month, we celebrated a tremendous victory in your case where the Supreme Court said that there is no place for hostility in a civil society, especially hostility towards someone's faith, towards someone's religious beliefs. And so they said Colorado violated your free exercise rights. They couldn't force you to express a message or to live in a way that was inconsistent with who you are. And so that was a tremendous 7-2 victory that we had in 2018. And I know it blessed you greatly and blessed so many Americans then. But Jim, I want to pull you in here because we won that. And we would have thought that Jack would be fine, things would be great. So help our audience understand, how are we about to go into the Colorado Supreme Court in not Jack's second case, but actually his third case?
Yeah. So Kelly, you talked a little bit about the first case, which involved a request to make a wedding cake that would have violated Jack's beliefs. And Jack got a win there. But if we go back to the day that the U.S. Supreme Court decided to hear that case, Jack got a call. A call came into the shop that day. And the call was requesting a cake, a pink and blue cake, to symbolize and reflect a gender transition. And that was something that Masterpiece Cake Shop couldn't create because it conflicts with Jack's beliefs. And so that was what they communicated to the customer. The customer was an attorney that called in and made this request. And then that case resulted in a complaint being filed with the state of Colorado, complaining that Jack declined to create that cake. The case sat there for a little while until the U.S. Supreme Court issued the ruling in Jack's first case. And then just weeks after that, the state of Colorado picked up that complaint and decided to come after Jack again. So rather than sit back and allow that to happen, we at Alliance Defending Freedom filed a lawsuit against the state of Colorado to get them to stop. And to make a long story short on that case, we eventually exchanged some documents with the state of Colorado and found out that some of the commissioners that were the head of that state agency, they had continued to say hostile things about Jack and about his faith and about what the Supreme Court said in the first case. And the minute that we got those documents, it became pretty clear that we were probably going to win that case again, that we got those documents. And so we settled that case with the state of Colorado. So that's Jack's second case. Now you might ask, well, I thought it was settled. Why are we here in case number 3? And that's because after the settlement, the attorney who made this request for the gender transition cake then filed a lawsuit trying to further the case that was already settled between the state and Jack, and the attorney was a part of that as well. So that's what brings us to the case now, or to the Colorado Supreme Court now, in that we're continuing to have to battle over this request that Jack received to celebrate a gender transition, something that he couldn't create that message because it conflicts with his beliefs.
And what exactly are we asking the Colorado Supreme Court? What are we hoping that they will give Jack?
So we're trying to make it clear that Jack did not violate the law by declining to create that cake, because Jack serves everyone. He'll serve that individual that made that request, but he just can't create a cake that symbolizes and reflects a gender transition.
Right. No, that makes sense. And Jack, I know that you even told this individual that you'd serve anything, create whatever they wanted. There's some messages that you couldn't. But I know this third case has been particularly challenging for you and your family. Just a new level of harassment and just pain that you guys have experienced. Share with us why that has been the case.
Yeah. Well, in this case, we had to go to trial, and my wife and I both had to take a witness stand with the opposing attorneys, cross-examining us, direct examining us, whatever you call it, but trying to get us to say something that they could use. And I had to sit there and watch these attorneys grill my wife for an extended period of time, and just sit there with my hands folded, watching them actually it was hurtful, trying to hurt my wife, harass my wife. And to sit there and have to watch that was very painful.
Yeah. And I think it was particularly painful because you've shared with me, I'm standing for everyone. even those who disagree with me. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, even if you don't agree with my stance on marriage or, the gender transition things, these judges have to look at the law and say that these laws protect everybody. And if they can take them away from me, they can take them away from everybody. So that's why we're still standing in this fight. I am grateful to ADF for their support and their defense in this case.
Well, and that kind of leads to a question I know I hear a lot. So I'd like to ask you the question, let you actually answer it. Why not create the cake, right? You had suffered litigation for 6 years the first time. It's now been another 6. Why not just create it?
We couldn't create this cake. And again, we told this person, we will celebrate other celebrations with you, create other cakes. But we couldn't create this one because of the message it expressed. And the reason we couldn't express it is the same reason we couldn't create the first cake, is because it violates my faith.
Yeah.
And I think the Constitution clearly protects that. But it's the same reason. I couldn't create it because it goes against my conscience. This one doesn't either. And I'd be glad to serve the 2 men in the first case, or this person, anything else that I would do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, we're so grateful for your stand and for your courage. And speaking of courage, I want to bring in Lorie Smith into our conversation here this morning. Lorie, you also know what it means to have the government, the state of Colorado, censor your speech and prevent you from creating art consistent with the core of who you are. And so you filed a lawsuit proactively back in 2016. You watched what had been happening to Jack in the first case, and you realized as a graphic designer, my rights are at risk as well. And so you filed against Colorado. It was a very long journey, and we're going to talk about the victory that we had just a year ago in just a minute. But before I get to that, I want to just bring you in and get your thoughts. You watched Jack, you've gone through this yourself. What was that experience like, the hills and the valleys?
I always wanted to design and create for weddings, but couldn't because Colorado was censoring and compelling my speech and really forcing me to imagine, design, create, and therefore celebrate messages that violate my beliefs. And so I had a very difficult decision to make. Watching Jack and the culture of what was happening around us, I made the decision to stand for freedom and ultimately challenge the injustice that I and others were facing. That stand came at a cost, a very deep cost, and there were several valleys and several hills as well. But like Jack, I have received several death threats, continued harassment. The cost has been both professional and personal. I've had my young daughter intercept packages at home. I've lost business. And for 7 years, I patiently waited to step into something that I had dreamed about all my life. It's definitely a challenging season.
Yeah. Well, your patience and courage paid off because a year ago, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a massive free speech victory in your case in 303 Creative, and they affirmed once again that no government can force anyone to say something that they don't believe. What was that like for you, being at the U.S. Supreme Court, hearing them talk about 303 Creative, and then securing this significant victory? Bring us into that moment, if you would, just that what was going through your mind just a year ago?
I can't believe it's been a year, and I'm still struggling to find words to articulate how incredible that moment was. Jack understands. He's shaking his head. For me, the victory was incredible and landmark. And for me, I celebrate, continue to celebrate, because the victory is not just for Lorie Smith and 303 Creative. The victory protects each and every American. No American should be forced to create and celebrate or design a message that violates what they believe in the core of who they are. And for me, I take a step back, and I've read the opinion a couple times, and one of the highlights for me was Justice Gorsuch really summarized the case quite clearly when he said, this is not about the who, this is about the what. And I've been saying this for years. I have clients from all different walks of life. I have clients who identify as LGBT, and while I love to serve everyone, there are certain messages I cannot create. So Justice Gorsuch really hit the nail on the head, and this case has always been about the what, not the who, just as in Jack's case. And so it was certainly a moment of victory, and one that I hope comes to play in this case today.
Well, definitely. And speaking of coming to play, I love Justice Gorsuch's point that he said, look, tolerance, not coercion, is the answer in a democratic society. And so, Jim, I want to ask you, what role will 303 Creative play in Jack's case? Will it come up today? Do you think an argument? And should it ultimately decide what happens to Jack based on what the U.S. Supreme Court said a year ago? Does that bind the Colorado Supreme Court?
It should play a very, very big role in the argument today. And it does bind the Colorado Supreme Court. So 303 Creative essentially established the principle that a creative professional cannot be forced to create custom speech that expresses a message they disagree with. What Jack was asked to do in this case was to create a custom pink and blue cake that the customer said would express a message that Jack disagrees with. And so a faithful application of the 303 Creative decision should result in a win for Jack.
Definitely. And, the thing I wanted to also ask is that, Lorie, you talked about your journey. And I'm just curious for you, as you look back and you see the victory, you see how it should help Jack's case. Was it worth it? And I guess also I'm just really curious, what is your hope today for Jack?
Of course it was worth it. I know as I was praying about what to do in those moments, before I decided to take a stand, I thought about others. I know that if I want freedom for myself, I have to defend it for others. I thought about my daughter. I thought about the next generation. If my daughter and her friends grow up to be artists, I don't want them to have to be in the same place that I am, which means I need to take a stand to protect these rights today and to defend it for others, for future generations. So yes, it was worth it. And my hope for Jack is that one day, Jack, you and I will be able to collaborate on a wedding together. I look forward to that moment. We can celebrate that moment together, and it will be sweet. But I also recognize that in order to do that, the court must step in to correct this injustice once and for all. I mean, you've endured this for over a decade, and so my hope is today that the court will correct this injustice and allow you to create consistent with your faith, because ultimately no one should be forced to create a message that they don't agree with. And justice for you in this case is justice for everyone. You're standing not just for yourself, but for those who may have different views on marriage. He or she shouldn't be forced to create inconsistent with their beliefs as well.
Well, I love that you said that. I love that you said justice for Jack, because I remember going back into your first case, many of us gathered at the U.S. Supreme Court. So many of you watching want justice for Jack because you too know that means justice for everyone. So know that a lot of people have your back, Jack, as we go into this morning. But speaking of going into the argument, Jim, I want to get your perspective, kind of pull back the curtain of what we might expect. We are often at the U.S. Supreme Court. This is a little different. We're at the Colorado Supreme Court. So what can our viewers expect to sort of see during the argument once we tune into that here in a few minutes?
So they'll notice that there are a number of justices that are all sitting behind the bench, and the justices will be hearing arguments just from the attorneys today. So the case will start off by Alliance Defending Freedom's attorney, Jake Warner, who's arguing on behalf of Jack, will approach the court, stand in front of the justices, and he will make his argument. Now, during that process, he will certainly have points he's going to make, but the justices will be asking him regular questions. So he'll get interrupted from time to time, and he'll do his best to answer their questions. And then the other side's attorney will get up and will make the arguments, and then there will be an opportunity for our attorney, Jake, to come back to the lectern for 5 more minutes at the end to wrap up the argument. You won't hear from Jack this morning. This isn't a trial. This is an appellate court oral argument. And so Jack will be in the courtroom. He will be listening. He will be cheering for Jake, but he will not actually be testifying. And that's essentially how the morning will go. And we're hopeful that it will be a successful morning for Jack.
That's really helpful. We're glad we got to talk to you, Jack, for just a few minutes here. But you mentioned the arguments, Jim. Give us a sense of what arguments might we hear? What should we be looking for, maybe anticipating, maybe just be wary of if it comes up?
Yeah, so the one thing that I want to mention, just so that folks who are listening aren't confused by it, is there's an aspect of this case that's procedural and technical. So you'll hear arguments and questions about final rulings and final judgments and preclusion and things like that. It's all very technical legal stuff. That's an aspect of this case. And so that will probably be hard to follow. But then there's other parts of the argument, and I would guess the majority of what we're going to hear today is going to be about religious freedom and primarily freedom of speech. So there's going to be questions about whether this cake really was expressing a message, and whether that message is something that the state of Colorado, by applying its law, can force Jack to express. And there will also be some acknowledgement, I'm sure, that this ruling for Jack will also benefit people that have a different outlook on life, that this freedom is a freedom for everyone. So that's what we'll hear a lot of this morning in the courtroom.
That's really helpful. And I'm curious, too, for our listeners, you touched on this earlier, but just sort of in a nutshell, what is Jake going to be asking the court? And what is the summary of his argument that he's going to be asking the court this morning?
Essentially,
what does a win look like?
Yeah. Jake's going to be arguing to the court that Jack didn't violate Colorado's law, that Jack serves everyone, but he can't express all messages through his custom cakes.
Yeah.
And that properly understood should not violate Colorado's law. And then what else Jake is going to be arguing for is for the First Amendment rights and the freedom of speech. And he's going to say that regardless of what Colorado law says, the U.S. Constitution does not allow the state of Colorado to force Jack to express messages that violate his beliefs.
No, that's really helpful. And Jack, I know we're really hopeful that the Colorado Supreme Court will look at what happened in 303 Creative and agree with that decision and say that no one can force you to violate the core of who you are, and no one can force anyone to say something that they don't believe. I'm just curious on a personal level as we start to wrap up our time this morning and prepare to go into the court. It's been a long several years, over a decade, as Lorie mentioned. What's kept you going? What's given you that resolve, that courage to be so steadfast in your convictions and in your faith?
Primarily, it is my faith in Jesus Christ that sustains me and directs how I think and how I approach, like I said, how I approach my job, my marriage, my family, my customers. But it also has helped has helped to bring my family closer together. I have family outside today, family watching on the stream, but church, family, friends, customers have all come to encourage us, as well as Alliance Defending Freedom being there to defend us and knowing that we have the best legal representation that we could have, and that God's provided everything we need. So we just trust Him to give wisdom to the judges to understand what the law means.
Yeah.
Not what they think it means, but what it means and how it's designed to protect us, all of us, in these situations.
Yeah. Well, I know you have thousands of people watching, tuning in today, listening to you, praying for you, hoping that you will have justice in your case. So we're so grateful to you, Jack, here at Alliance Defending Freedom. It's been an honor and a privilege to represent you over the years, to stand alongside you and your family. And just, we're so grateful. I know my children and my grandchildren will owe a huge debt of gratitude to both you and Lorie for your stand for foundational freedoms for all Americans. The core of what makes this country great is the ability to speak freely and to live consistent with our beliefs. So I just want to thank you, express gratitude, and just know that you are covered by prayer and support from so many of you who have tuned in this morning. We are so grateful to you for standing with Jack, for standing up for justice for Jack. So thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support of Alliance Defending Freedom and Jack's case. And we're now going to turn in. We're going to go inside the court, but we'll ask you just to sit tight, maybe grab a cup of coffee. You'll have a few moments of silence as we go from this to the actual live stream of the court's argument that Jim talked to us about. So definitely invite you to stick around for that. And then following the argument, I am thrilled that you'll be joined by my colleagues, John Scruggs and Brian Neihart. They have been longtime litigators for Alliance Defending Freedom, defending free speech and the free exercise rights of all Americans. So they will be giving you a debrief of how argument went, how we thought the justices' questions, what they meant, and what the future could look like for Jack. So stay tuned for that. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we hope that you have a wonderful day.